everybody. This is Michael Munson with Forge, and I'm excited that folks are here today, and we're going to talk about housing, which is a subject that a lot of folks are concerned about, and there's a lot of questions about some of the new rules that are happening in Wisconsin and across the country. I think we're going to spend most of the time talking about Wisconsin-based rules, laws, changes, but we'll go where we need to go. Again, I'm Michael Munson with Forge. I use he, him, and his pronouns. And I wanted to thank our funder before we get rolling. Our funder is the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And we're in partnership, Forge is in partnership with Froedtert and the Medical College of Wisconsin's Inclusion Health Clinic. So we're excited about that partnership, and we have a really rich set of programming, both these ask programmings where we have specialists, doctors, nurses, advocates coming in and talking and sharing their information and allowing space for questions. And then we have connect activities, which are a little bit more intimate and support based. So a lot of folks know about Zoom, but if folks have questions today, we can do that through the chat feature. So you can find the chat bar, which most of you are familiar with by now, and ask your questions that way. I'm going to turn things over to Shelley Gregory, who's one of Forge's staff people, and they can take things away from now. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us on this very lovely afternoon in May in Wisconsin. We're very lucky to have some lovely weather right now. So here we are to talk about housing during COVID-19. Obviously, housing is one of our, most important resources. It's something we can spend a lot of money on. And it's something that, obviously may be really difficult to maintain if our income is at risk, if we lose jobs, if we lose hours during COVID. So we want to talk about housing resources that are available in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. And we want to talk about some of the new rules that have been established by both our federal and our state governments to help provide some relief, particularly for renters, although there's also some assistance for those of us who may be homeowners as well. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about what the law of the land is right now in terms of rentals, what our rights are, and what landlords can and can't do right now. Folks may be aware that there have been a few different bans or prohibitions on evictions, on rental evictions that have been put in place by Governor Evers and some that have come from the federal legislation. We had a ban in Wisconsin and it actually expired just a few days ago. And so there are some folks in Wisconsin who may have to start dealing with some eviction proceedings. We do have some bans that are still in place for some kinds of housing. And unfortunately, this is a little bit confusing, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So while the Wisconsin ban is no longer in place, there is still a ban from the federal government on evictions for certain kinds of housing. And basically, it's housing that is subsidized by the federal government, but it can be subsidized in lots and lots of different ways. So if somebody lives in a property, if you rent an apartment in a property that is federally subsidized housing, so essentially public housing, if you're somebody who is a federal voucher recipient, so that means like Section 8 housing, or if you live in a building where your landlord has a mortgage, so their loan that allows them to have that house, if that loan is insured by or backed by, or if that landlord receives any benefit from the federal government, that property is also covered under this ban on evictions. So I'm going to say that again because I think it's kind of confusing. So any property that essentially has any assistance from the federal government, we still have a ban on evictions for people renting in those properties. So again, that's public housing, that's Section 8 voucher recipients, and that's rentals from private landlords where that landlord is getting some assistance from the federal government. In all of those situations, we have a ban on evictions that went into effect in March, and it remains in effect through July 25th. So, what does that mean for somebody who is renting? What it means is that your landlord cannot start an eviction process right now for non-payment of rent. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't owe rent. We still owe rent. We are going to continue to owe rent. But if we can't pay rent, if folks are unable to pay the rent to their landlord in any of those kinds of properties, that landlord cannot make attempts to evict you right now, and they can't do that until that ban expires on July 25th. So how do you know, if you're a person whose property is covered by this eviction ban? Again, if you're in public housing, you probably know that. Your landlord is the housing authority. If you're receiving a Section 8 voucher, you know that. What if you rent from a private landlord? How do you know if they're getting assistance from the federal government that makes that property fall under this ban on evictions? Well, there's some websites that you can go to. And the best website to go to find a whole list of tools that will help you try to figure out if your landlord, if their building is subject to this ban on evictions. So the best place to find that list is on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's website. That's a federal agency that looks out for consumers. And so they're helping us look out for ourselves with these eviction bans. And they've got a whole list there of other websites, unfortunately, that you can go through to try to see if your landlord's building is covered by the eviction ban. And we'll put the website for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in the chat box. The website is www.consumerfinance.gov. So, what this means for folks whose properties are covered by the eviction ban is that if you can't pay your rent, you can't be evicted right now, okay? So you are safe, you can maintain your housing, you can stay in your home, all right? And we'll talk about what to do in a little bit, some practical steps to take if you can't pay your rent right now. The other thing that folks should be aware of is that the state of Wisconsin has just recently issued another order. And this order says that landlords cannot assess late fees to any renters right now. So if you're renting and you're not paying your rent, what's the next thing you worry about? You worry about late fees, right? And those fees sometimes compound, weekly or sometimes even daily, and that can really add up. You don't have to worry about that right now. The state of Wisconsin said they're not going to allow landlords to assess or collect late fees for failing to pay rent, okay? So there's a little extra protection there as well. You're not going to rack up a bunch of fees that you have to pay later. Now, there's also a ban on foreclosures right now on some kinds of properties. Again, it's not all properties, but there's a ban on foreclosing on properties that have mortgages on them. So a homeowner has a loan, you're making monthly payments to the bank that holds your loan, and you can't make those payments right now. There are foreclosure bans so that your bank cannot foreclose on your house and take your house away. However, again, this only applies to certain properties, and these are properties that are FHA insured. So the Federal Housing Authority is insuring and backing those houses. If you have a mortgage, you probably have an FHA based insurance policy on that mortgage. And you may not be aware of that, but your bank probably made you do it because the bank is protecting its investment in your home. So you probably have an FHA insured mortgage, and you want to look into that if you're in a position where you can't make your mortgage payments soon, or you anticipate not being able to make your mortgage payments. That ban on foreclosures on homeowners is only runs right now through June 30th. So that's different than the ban on evicting renters, which runs through July 25th. Right? Now, for the foreclosure ban, what this means for homeowners who are having trouble making their payments is that no new foreclosures can be started right now. And it means that pending foreclosures are going to be halted. They're going to be paused. Those proceedings are going to stop right now. It also means that you can't be put out of your home. If you're a homeowner on a single family home, you can't be evicted from that home for failing to make your mortgage payments right now. Now, those are some protections that we have from the state and federal government right now to help kind of ease our burden in making our rental payments or our mortgage payments. Are there any funds out there that are available that can help folks who may have lost jobs or have other losses of income, who can't or pay their rent, or who anticipate having trouble paying rent coming up? Yes. So you may have heard about a new program that Governor Evers announced, I think about 2 weeks ago. This is the Wisconsin Rental Assistance Program. And they're using the word WRAP, W-R-A-P, to refer to that, the Wisconsin Rental Assistance Program. So this is a program where the state has put aside $25 million in funding to go directly to renters, well, to their landlords actually, to help pay rent for people who can't make those rent payments. The program will become available on June 8th. It's not yet available. They're still rolling the program out. We'll tell you how to indicate to them that you're interested in the program right now. But let me tell you about how the program works and what the eligibility is. So this program and this rental assistance will be available for folks who are Wisconsin residents. You need to be an adult, and it is an income-based program. However, the limits are a little higher than a lot of other income-based programs are, so don't let that deter you from looking into the rental assistance program if you think you need it. Household income, in order to qualify for rental assistance, needs to be at this limit that's called 80% of the county median. And so what that means is that you have to make 80% or less of kind of what the average income is throughout the county that you live in. So for Milwaukee County, as an example, for a one-person household, that limit is $47,000 in income. For a four-person household, that's $67,000. So if your income is at those limits or below, you may qualify for the rental assistance program. Now, what kind of costs does the program help with? It can help with rent that you owe. It can also help with security deposits. The program is limited, however, and it can only pay out a total amount of $3,000 to any individual. But those funds are out there and they're going to be available in the next 2 weeks. In Milwaukee County and some of the surrounding counties, the Social Development Commission is responsible for implementing this program. We deal with them for a bunch of other programs as well. On their website, they've got an inquiry form that you can go fill out right now, even though the program's not available yet. And you can let them know that you're interested, and then they'll reach back out to you when it's time to apply. And we have already got that website in the chat box. It looks like it's kind of a goofy website, www.cr sdc.org. We've got the whole URL sitting in the chat box there for you. So that's some rental assistance, some money that's available to help pay rent. That money doesn't come into your pocket. That money is going to be taken from the state government, and it's going to be sent right to your landlord to pay rent that you owe them or to pay a security deposit. So you won't see that in your pocket, but that money will be applied to your rent if you're found to be qualified, and if you qualify for the money and you get the money. Okay. So what do we do if, even with some of the eviction protections and with some of the rental assistance protections, what do we do if we think we're not going to be able to pay our rent in the next month? Like June 1st is coming up, I think, Monday, and a lot of people will have rent due on Monday. The first thing you want to do if you think that you're going to have trouble paying your rent is you really, really, really want to try to find out if that ban on evictions applies to the property that you're living in. Because at least if you can't pay your rent, you'll know that your landlord can't evict you right now. And that's really important information to have. One way you can get that information is to ask your landlord. If they are not forthcoming with that information, so if they don't share that information, if they don't know that information, if they just don't want to tell you that information, then you can use that website that we talked about earlier, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau website, where they've got a whole list of online resources to help you find out if that eviction ban applies to the property that you're living in. Okay, so you definitely want to find out if you have that protection. The other thing you really need to do is to communicate with your landlord. What this is probably going to come down to is negotiating with your landlord about making a smaller payment, or maybe about deferring or putting off some of your payments. If you know that you're going to be going back to work in a month, you can tell your landlord that, and tell them that you may need another month to pay the rent. And hopefully you can reach an agreement with them about how to get that rent paid that's going to alleviate some of your financial burdens that you have right now. What do we not want to do? What we don't want to do is nothing. Okay? It's important to talk to your landlord. Your landlord doesn't have the tools at their disposal that they normally do to get you out of their property if you're not paying the rent. So that landlord, they may not be able to evict you. If they can't evict you, they're going to be much more likely to want to negotiate or to compromise with you about minimizing your rent payment, giving you a break on your rent, or letting you maybe break it up into smaller payments, or maybe owe some of that money and pay it the next month. So think creatively about some kind of payment arrangement you might be able to propose to your landlord to help you get through this period of time. But please, 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 try not to just not pay your rent without talking to your landlord, because you might be buying yourself a bigger problem down the road, okay? A few other things to be aware of that can help in terms of figuring out how to get rent paid or how to get some relief from rent payments is rent freezes. There aren't any rent freezes that are effective right now, at least that I'm aware of in Milwaukee County. But it's certainly possible that a government, the state government, a municipal government at some point, depending on how long this continues, they may issue an order freezing rent payments and saying that we just basically don't have to pay our rent right now. That's not the case right now, though, let me stress that. The other thing you can think about is what's called a rent strike. So if you live in a multi-family or a multi-unit building where there are other tenants, it's likely that other tenants may also be having some trouble paying their rent right now. We know that, when a group of people gets together, they're often able to have a little bit more influence as a large group of people than we might have on our own as individuals. And so one thing we can do is band together the way that we band together as labor unions in a workplace. And we can band together and try to negotiate with the landlord, try to negotiate some relief from rent payments or a repayment plan. And if that doesn't work, one of the things that a group of tenants could do is decide that they're all going to band together and not pay their rent, so that nobody's hanging out there on their own, unable to pay their rent while everybody else is paying. So a rent strike and organizing tenants in your building is certainly another approach that can be taken. The other thing to be aware of is that if you do receive an eviction notice from your landlord right now, and you're not living in a building where the ban on evictions applies, the courts are closed. They're closed for in-person hearings. So what that means is that all of the hearings are being done telephonically or over video. That is probably going to delay some of these proceedings. So I would potentially expect that you might end up with a little bit more time if you do get an eviction notice right now. You may have a little more time to deal with that, and you may have a little more time before any order would become effective, simply because the courts are backlogged and because they're not working in person right now. The last thing I want to talk about is folks who might be experiencing homelessness right now. The shelters in Milwaukee are open for people who are experiencing homelessness. I don't know precisely what protocols the shelters are following, that each of them is following, in terms of screening folks for their health status. But the shelters are open, and the way to access those shelters is the same way that we always do, and that is to use the Impact 211 either phone line or website. And so we've got the phone number is 211. There's also like a regular 10-digit phone number and an 800 number. And all three of those numbers can be used to contact 211. We've put those in the chat box for you. You can also text with 211. And we've put the number in the chat box that you use to text with them. They also have an online chat that's available if you go to their website. So we want to contact 211. They'll do a screening with you, and they will give you instructions about checking in with them, about getting assigned to a shelter. I suspect that there are probably some significant delays in people getting placed in shelters right now. If you need some help, if you need some assistance, particularly if you're experiencing homelessness right now, please give us a call and we can help you navigate some of these resources. We can help you contact 211. We can see if there are some other resources to help out you or your family. And we'll give you our contact information at the end. Before we turn to talking about some resources, I do want to mention that there is pending legislation right now in Congress that I think will be passed sometime soon. It may not look the way it looks right now. It might be a smaller package that gets passed, but Congress is looking at passing some more relief. And in particular, they're looking at enacting some relief that goes to housing assistance, both for renters and for homeowners. So I want all of us to be aware that this is out there and that some changes could be on the horizon soon. The House passed this legislation 2 weeks ago, and they're currently negotiating with the Senate. And so we'll see what comes out of that process. But things that are being considered are a nationwide ban on evictions. And that's a nationwide ban that's being proposed for 12 months. It's still going to only apply to those properties that are receiving some kind of federal assistance, but it's going to extend that ban for another year. It will also add some additional protections for when that ban is over. The other thing it would do is it would extend the ban on foreclosures. So for homeowners who are unable to make mortgage payments, that ban on foreclosing on those homes could be extended. The bill is hopefully also going to contain a ton more money for emergency rental assistance. So that's the money that is intended to help us pay our landlords, help us actually make those rent payments. And there will also hopefully be some assistance for homeowners, a very similar kind of emergency assistance that will help homeowners make those mortgage payments. So watch the news and watch for an announcement from organizations like Forge about this legislation and about resources that might become available in the next few weeks. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available to us in Wisconsin, and particularly in southeastern Wisconsin and Milwaukee, to help meet housing needs. And these are resources that are always available, and some of them have created some additional programs and have some additional services in place to help respond specifically to the issues that are cropping up during this time, and to respond specifically to renters who have lost income and are unable to make rent payments. If you are in need of housing, if you're looking for housing, if you're looking for either affordable market rate housing, so housing that is rented out at typical rates, or if you're looking for some other kind of housing assistance, the agency that I would recommend you take a look at and contact is the Housing Authority of the City of Milwaukee. Their website is www.hacm.org. The Housing Authority has a number of different programs and a number of directories with different resources in them to help you find housing. Now, there are very few public housing programs that are open right now, and the Section 8 program is not open right now. If you go to that website, you'll get information about how to find out when those programs open. The other thing they have on that website is a directory to help you if you're looking for affordable housing. So housing that isn't necessarily subsidized by the government, but that will hopefully be affordable, that you'll be able to pay the rent on. So they've got some of those listings there on their website. And it looks like we've got their information in the chat box, and that website in the chat box for you. There are a couple of other places in the city of Milwaukee and throughout the state of Wisconsin that provide really great resources, particularly for renters. One of those is Community Advocates in Milwaukee. And we'll put their website up as well, which is communityadvocates.net. Community Advocates has wonderful people working there. They know all about all of the housing resources that are available in the city of Milwaukee. They have some of their own resources. They have some shelter housing there, and they are able to help folks figure out what kind of assistance programs they're eligible for, and then figure out how to get those programs and get those benefits. So if you know you need some assistance, if you need some assistance paying your utilities, if you know that you need to try to access some of these programs, Community Advocates is a place that you can call and talk to expert advocates for housing assistance. Another really great resource for renters is a place called the Tenant Resource Center. And this is a Wisconsin-based organization. They provide all kinds of information on their website explaining just about every right that tenants have. And they've got lots and lots of information on there that's specific to COVID and some of the additional rights and benefits that are available for renters right now. I highly recommend that website as a general information source. And we've put that in the chat box for you, and that's www.tenantresourcecenter.org. The last resource I want to mention right now is a list of places in Wisconsin who provide housing assistance. So this ranges from people who are advocates who can help you get information, who can help you figure out if you're eligible for any of these programs or benefits. It also includes places like the Legal Aid Society in Milwaukee that provides eviction defense, so that if you do receive an eviction notice from your landlord and you need to respond to that, you can find some lawyers using this directory who can help you respond to that eviction notice and help you do what you need to do in those proceedings to protect yourself and your rights. And that website is called justshelter.org. And so they've got a whole list of resources throughout the state of Wisconsin to help you with your housing issues. Okay. The last thing I want to do is just mention very, very quickly that, unfortunately, there are some people who, are attempting to take advantage of some of the challenging situations that some of us are in right now. And we want you to be on the lookout for scams, particularly scams that relate to your housing. Some things that are happening that the federal government is kind of warning us about is that folks are making fraudulent or scam sales calls. So they may call and tell you that they've got something, a test kit, air filters or filtration systems or other kinds of treatments for your home that will treat the air, that will take the virus out of the air, that will protect you. None of those things are real. And so we want to be very, very careful about talking to anybody who calls with offers for equipment for our homes to help with the virus. Some other things that you want to watch out for are charity solicitations. So you might get a call saying that somebody is with a particular organization and they're raising funds to help people, to help folks who maybe need some help paying their rent, or folks who have lost their jobs, or funding food sources for people, whatever it might be. I would really recommend that you not make any donation to anybody who calls you or sends you an email, and you instead take their information, ask them for a website, and then you yourself literally go type in that website in an internet browser so that you are entering that information, and then you see, take a look and see if that website is legitimate and research that organization before you make donations that might not really be going to the people that you want them to go to. And the other thing I just want to mention is that, there are lots and lots of scams that people do all the time that are intended to get your Social Security information and your Social Security number. And so, like always, nobody is going to call you from the government. No one is going to call you legitimately asking you to tell them your Social Security information or other personally identifying information. If you get some kind of call like that or an email like that, again, take that person's information, don't give them any of your information, and then check later when you either get off the phone or when you have time to take a look at some kind of email that you've received. You want to really continue to protect your Social Security information right now. So That is about all I have that I really wanted to share with everybody today and go over. And we've certainly got some minutes left here if folks have any questions that they'd like to ask. You can do that in the chat box, or I think if you know how to find does the raise hand function work in this forum, Michael? Yeah.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so you can use the little raised hand function and we'll see you. And if you want to come on and ask a question, you can do that.
And thank you, Shelley, for all of that information. And I just wanted to remind folks that we were recording today and it was really a lot of dense information. So if you need to go back and look at it and get those URLs, it will be available on Forge's website within the next day or two. So we will let folks know when that's available. Do folks have questions for Shelley? Again, I know there's a lot of information that was covered, a lot of information that probably was not yet covered that people may have questions about.
Yeah, and as always, we're available and I'm available certainly for folks to contact. If you just have questions, if there's something we talked about today that didn't make sense, or that you need more information about, or if you'd like some assistance, looking into some of these programs for yourself, give us a call and we can provide you with some one-on-one assistance in doing those things.
Shelley, as we're waiting for folks, if they have questions, I had a couple of questions that I would like to ask, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. So I believe there used to be a law in Milwaukee that said that you couldn't have a certain number of people living under one roof that were not related. Does that still stand? It was something like 4 people or 6 people that weren't family. Is that still a law? Do you know?
So I actually, I'm not sure that I can answer that question very specifically for you, but laws like, and so I don't know what the state of that law might be in Milwaukee, but laws that dictate who can live together generally are not considered valid and haven't been considered valid for a long time. So the government doesn't get to say that I can't live with, my partner and then a couple of roommates, or if I'm in a poly family, that we can't all live together because we're not all legally married, or if a grandmother is living with her grandchildren, that there's a limit on who can live there, how many people can live there, because it's not a parent-child relationship. So those laws are generally not valid, and if somebody's being told that that's a problem, you definitely give us a call, and we can help out with that.
And I was just asking because I know a lot of people try to save their rent money by living together in
Right.
Groups of people, and obviously there's an issue with what your rental agreement is with your landlord, which is separate from a more citywide or statewide.
Right. And that's a good point, right? So when we sign a lease with a landlord, that's a contract. So we've made a legal contract with the landlord. And that contract certainly could say, hey, Shelley, you told me 2 people were going to live here. That's what I'm expecting. And that's what we're going to write in the lease, that 2 people are going to live here. And that's completely legitimate. And that's a contract that you've entered into. And if you then want to bring a 3rd person into the house, then you have to go back and talk to the landlord and negotiate that with the landlord.
That makes sense. Are there other questions that folks have? Because I do have one more question if other people don't have questions.
While we're waiting, Michael, I'm a little bit, I failed to mention that, for folks who maybe have contracted the novel coronavirus and maybe have developed COVID-19, so either you have symptoms, you self-quarantined maybe, or maybe you have a diagnosis even, or you had a diagnosis in the past of COVID-19, please know that that is a medical condition that cannot be a basis for discrimination in housing. You cannot be forced out of your housing, or you cannot be denied new housing. because of your health status with regard to COVID-19.
And that reminds me of a question. So now I have more than one question. I believe like about a month ago, the landlords were not showing new units to people like in person. So you couldn't say, I want to see this apartment to rent and can I come and see it in person? Do you know if that's still happening where you'd have to have like a remote tour where it'd be like by video or something like that? Or can you go to an apartment and see it before you would rent it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that answer is going to vary depending on what city people are living in. So initially, landlords were told by the state of Wisconsin under the Safer at Home order that they were not an essential business. So essentially, it was specifically spelled out in the Safer at Home order that landlords shouldn't be going into anybody's apartment, into anybody's unit for any reason other than a clear and present maintenance emergency. So a busted pipe or an electrical wire sticking out of the wall, something that's got to be fixed immediately. So because of that, landlords weren't showing rental units. Now, we know that the Safer at Home order from the state of Wisconsin was done away with by the Supreme Court 2 weeks ago. So that order is no longer in place. So any orders about essential businesses and who can be doing what is now all going to be governed on like a county or a city level. So, in the city of Milwaukee, our Safer at Home order tracked the state's Safer at Home order almost exactly. And that order has stayed in place. My understanding at this point in time would be that it is unlikely that landlords in Milwaukee are showing apartments or that they should be showing apartments, even though they might do it anyway. If you're in a suburb of Milwaukee, or you're in a place where your county or your city or town doesn't have its own Safer at Home order in place, then there just really are no restrictions. And it's up to individuals to decide what they want to do, if they want to show apartments or not.
So it sounds like people, if they're looking for a new apartment, maybe kind of coming in blind. I mean, they may not be able to literally see if there are cracks on the walls. They're trusting videos or still pictures before they're signing a lease. Is that?
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a challenge. What I would do, I just had to move, so I just went through this myself. And as I was leaving my apartment, my landlord asked me to make some videos of my apartment. And I did that, and I'm a conscientious person, and so I showed the good things and the bad things about my apartment for the folks who were going to be watching those videos. I would say if you're trying to rent a place, I think that you should feel pretty free to ask for as much information as you feel like you need before you sign a lease. I got lots and lots of questions that came back to me from my landlord, from the potential renters, including, could you measure the bedroom? I'd like to know, if my super king size bed, will fit in the bedroom. So I think people really need to probably be a little bit assertive about asking very specific questions about the apartment that you're looking at and renting, because those are representations that the landlord is making that you hopefully would be able to hold them to.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. And you just mentioned that landlords couldn't or can't come into your apartment unless there's some emergency need for them to come in. And I'm wondering if you can share, if somebody does need to come into your apartment, can you as a tenant or as a homeowner or whatever it is, require that that person wears protective gear when they come into your space, like a mask?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Michael. And I don't know that I don't know that we have the ability to require that somebody entering certainly our rental unit be wearing a mask. Because we just don't have any legal, um, uh, we just don't have any rules in place right now that have the authority of the government behind them, at least in Wisconsin, and at least in Milwaukee. So the CDC, of course, has recommended that we all be wearing face coverings when we go out. Our Safer at Home order reflects that, but those are guidances. Now, we have heard about some places like Virginia, where the governor just created a rule that says, look, face masks are mandatory if you're an adult, unless you have a medical reason or some other legitimate reason that makes it, difficult or impossible for you to wear a mask. So we unfortunately don't have that here right now. Again, I mean, I think I would try to talk to folks. I would try to insist, and I would maybe try to explain why, if they're not listening or not understanding, about why you need those protections to be taken. Now, you can, of course, always protect yourself to some degree by wearing a mask yourself. Of course, the cloth masks are not precisely intended to protect the person wearing them, and they don't block all of the virus. But you can certainly wear the mask yourself. You can leave the house. If you're a person who has, say, you're at heightened risk for COVID, or you're immunosuppressed or immunocompromised, maybe consider finding a friend or somebody else who could be in your house if you don't want your landlord in there by themselves, if they're in there to make a repair or something like that. So think about maybe creatively about how you can eliminate or at least lower your own risk if somebody's got to come into your house.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I know that there wasn't a firm answer with that, and we can't require it, but sometimes it's really hard to, step up and say, would you please do this?
Yeah.
I'd feel more comfortable if you wore a mask. 'Cause it's hard when somebody's coming in and is doing a service for you to step up and do that. So I know we've had some work done, in our space, and it's kind of, it's difficult to make that request, even if it's for everybody's best health to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the other suggestion I would make is, maybe have that conversation before the landlord or before the repair person shows up at your house.
Mhm.
So if you're texting with your landlord or emailing or talking on the phone, setting up the appointment for them to come in and make the repair, that's probably a really good time to have this conversation. And maybe it's a little bit easier to do that in writing when we have a little more time to think about what we want to say and how we want to say it. And then, if you've gotten an agreement either from the landlord or from, say it's a business, maybe it's a plumbing company and they're going to be sending a plumbing person over, a plumber over. If you've got an agreement from that business ahead of time that their person is going to be wearing a mask when they're in your house, that can make it a little bit easier then at that time to say, hey, here's what I talked about with your employer, and can we do this? Can we wear the masks?
Right, which is really good. And I think sometimes, like when we're wearing a mask, sometimes it reminds other people to do it as well. So like, when we open the door, it may, prompt them to say, oh, I better go get mine as well. So gives a signal. I want to give space for anybody else that wants to ask a question. And then Shelley, before we end, I had one more question, which is a kind of a softball question, but it's something that I think that when we're living in this world that's really tough for a lot of us right now, the question is like, how can we help our friends if they're struggling with housing? We talked about other basic needs before, but are there things that we can do if we are fortunate enough to have the resources or have our own living space? How can we help our friends that may not be in that same situation?
I mean, that's a good question, Michael. I mean, and we certainly know that folks, struggle with housing, even when we're not, under the sort of health kind of crisis that we're in right now. One thing folks can always do is share resources with their friends, right? So sharing information like this video that'll be recorded and available on Forge's website, sharing information about advocates and organizations that can help, and maybe encouraging people to reach out for help from somebody like us. So sharing my phone number and my email, people can call us and we can help them. If folks are in a place where they don't want to reach out necessarily to others for help, I'm happy to talk to somebody about a friend. We can make phone calls for people if they need some help. Certainly if we have space in our own homes and are able to help give people some temporary places to live, that's great. I think I would personally caution people to think a little bit about who we're inviting into our homes, and how we're going to, establish good boundaries to make sure that we're comfortable with having somebody stay with us and comfortable that when it's time for them to move on, that we can make that happen in a way that works for everybody.
That's great. Thank you. And I know that's it's a difficult question, because I think when we oftentimes think about how can we help our friends, we think about, well, I could give them money, which is great if that's a possibility, or yeah, they could sleep on my couch if that's, within those boundaries that we set. But I mean, you gave some really practical suggestions, which is like share this video with people, or offer like your information, Shelley, or other people's information so that they can help connect people, or offer to do things like make phone calls, or like you mentioned, offer to come in, sit and wait for like a service person to come if they're like trying to check out of their apartment and moving into another apartment. So there's some ways that we can kind of put our bodies or our voices on the line for other people, not just by offering them cash or couches. So that was really good to hear. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I wanted to thank you, Shelley, for spending your beautiful afternoon with us, and Jill for interpreting on the beautiful afternoon, and everybody who is here as an attendant to spend this time with us today. So we are not fully set up for our next week's programming, but we will be letting folks know what's going to be happening in June in the next day or two, because it's almost June right now. So we will let folks know. There's a quick survey to fill out at the end of this, and we'd really appreciate your feedback if you can spend a couple minutes. So thanks everybody for being here.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jill.